Ladies and gentlemen, I think this is time to start our webinar. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to this webinar, to the third webinar of our series of world market half-year reviews. We've already had one with the focus on Australia and Asia. We had last week one about Europe, MENA region and Africa. And today it's my pleasure to have an excellent panel of speakers presenting the wind markets in the Americas, North America, Central America, but also here, and South America. The purpose, of course, of the webinar is to reflect the status of wind power in the middle of this year, also under the impact of the pandemic situation of COVID-19. So with this, again, let me welcome everybody who is a part of our webinar here. Just a few guiding words at the beginning. This, of course, is a public event. So whatever you say, when you raise your voice, when you speak, it will be not only recorded now, it's also broadcasted live stream on YouTube at this point of time. Later also, we will publish all the recordings of the webinars on our YouTube channel, where you can also find all other recordings of our previous webinars. Of course, those speakers who would not like their presentation to be broadcasted later, please let us know. Yeah, with this, let me also mention that I would request every participant to stay muted until we call you to speak. For questions, primarily, please use the chat window so you can address the speaker in the chat window as well. We can read the question and then ask the speaker to answer directly your question. Thank you from my side at this point of time also for everybody who is supporting us in holding these webinars, primarily, of course, all the speakers, also our partners, and Profig Ventus, who is supporting this series of webinars, which allows us to make it happen and allow it to happen for free. Now, without further ado, I would start with our first speaker. And what we try to do is we go from east to west, following the time zones that those for whom it is still early morning are the last to speak. And following this, I have the pleasure to invite our first speaker, Professor Everaldo Feitosa from Brazil, who is one of the pioneers of the Brazilian wind energy market. Everaldo, you are also a long-term board member of WWEA and hosted last year our World Wind Energy Conference in Rio de Janeiro, which was actually the last major gathering we had, physical gathering, which without knowing that. Now we look forward to hearing from you about the status, latest developments in Brazil. Everaldo.
Okay, thank you, Stefan. First, I would like to give my congratulations for the initiative of this webinar, and I would try to go straight away to the presentation. Yeah. Right. So this first slide, I think, is the slide that is showing us big numbers. So we have now in Brazil approximately installed capacity of 16,000 megawatts and 5,000 megawatts under construction. When I mention 5,000 megawatts under construction, it's very important to emphasize the side of the private PPAs. In reality, most of the projects that are under construction now are private PPAs and not the auctions from the government based on the corporate responsibility for carbon zero strategy. So this is a new tendency in Brazil that I will show in more details. So in reality, when you see the country ranking at the end of 2019, we see Brazil in the 8th place in the world. So this is a very important consideration when you see the market for wind in Brazil. And again, 90% of the wind projects in Brazil are located in the Northeast region. This is another important point, because when we have at the moment most of the transmission lines not enough to transport the electricity generated in the northeast of Brazil to the south of Brazil, to the southeast of Brazil, this is still a big concern in Brazil. How we are going to expand the proportion of wind energy in the northeast of Brazil, and most of the consumers are located in the south of Brazil. This is a big question that probably will be a huge debate in this year, next year. Why? Because we have in the Northeast, this slide is very important, because the slide is showing the energy generation in Northeast of Brazil this year. In spite of the COVID, we still have all the projects under construction, and basically we have a kind of gap during 6 months, but all the projects are under a very straightforward timetable. So in September, we can see here, we can see most of the time in June, July, August, September, and October, most of the time, the wind energy is generated more than 50% of the electricity consumed in the Northeast. And in September, we have 100% of energy from wind. This is very important, because in the Northeast of Brazil, we have more than 50 million of people living in this region. The tendency that we can see, this is an important slide. We can see in the red line the electricity price in US dollars per megawatt hour. So from 2017 to 2018, 2019, the prices have decreased substantially. And we can see the price decreasing from $35 per megawatt hour on the left side to nearly $20, $25 per megawatt hour in last year, mainly due to the auction. And why we have this so low price? To have such a wind energy projects selling with a price less than $25 per megawatt hour, the only way to have this kind of strategy is decreasing the amount of electricity that you are going to participate in the auction from the government. So we can see here the tendency. So nearly the end of last year, with the last auction at the end of 2019, 40% of the electricity have been sold to the government auction, and 60% sold to the private market. So with this kind of mixture between private and government auction, the companies can really decrease the price and going ahead in a different strategy. So this strong tendency have started in 2017. As we can see here, the red column shows the free market, so 2019 and 2020, and this is a tendency that we are going to have in Brazil. And I have the opinion that in 2-3 years' time, the free market will reach the same amount of the regulated market in Brazil. And we can see here the tendency. These are the projects already approved by the Brazilian regulatory agencies. we can see here in 2021, 1,252 megawatts in the free market and nearly 1,000 in the auctions. And in 2022, we are going to have nearly 3 times the amount of the government auction install capacity. So this is a new tendency. It's important because we can see that the companies are going in the greener products, in the line of greener products, greener generation, and carbon neutral. So we have this kind of dichotomy between the government attitude and the private sector in Brazil. Okay.
That's it. Very good. Everaldo, I think that this is extremely exciting. Thanks a lot for your presentation. And I think that that is a very, very interesting development that we see. Actually, we heard from some other countries where the auctions are creating big problems. In particular, India. I was actually this morning in a webinar where there was a discussion, and I think we have one colleague here from India as well, that the auctions are delivering too low prices. And I think for India, this is also something that the colleague may be interested in hearing, that now the market is providing higher prices than the outcome of the auctions are. Very interesting. What would you see, Everaldo, or how would you see the impact of COVID-19? Does it have an impact on the price level on the market? Because I assume that, like in other countries as well, the general demand for power is now decreasing. Everaldo, can you still hear me?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, please.
Okay, so we have not seen a strong impact in the wind energy sector in Brazil. So we have decreased the consumption of electricity in the range between 5 and 10%. But since last month, the consumption has increased very substantial in Brazil. Mm-hmm. And the only impact has been in the beginning due to the lack of components, mainly from China. So the wind turbine manufacturers, they have a kind of delay in the delivery of the projects. But as we are now going to the private PPAs, the companies are trying to speed up all the process for generated energy from renewables. So this is the opposite. After COVID, in spite of the government decision not to publicize some kind of actions for the carbon neutral, but all the companies have seen that we cannot wait for the government. This is the right time to go forward, and the companies that are not involved in this new wave, they will be in the past. So this is at least something very good that's happening in Brazil at the moment.
That sounds very promising. And actually, one part of what you say is being shared by all the previous country representatives that we heard. Some of them say there is some delay this year, but in the midterm already, everybody has agreed that there are bright prospects now, even as the COVID-19 impact is that governments are rather focusing more on domestic energy sources. So I see one question here. Which other alternatives do you have for utilizing the electricity from the north, besides building more transmission lines?
Well, we have in Brazil, in the north, we have the hydroelectric power plants, with dams. In the northeast, we have wind and solar. And most of the consumers are located in the southeast of Brazil. So the way Brazil is divided in 4 regions for electricity generation and to the control of this flow of electrons in the north, northeast, south, and southeast. So we, at the moment, we see the only problem is to reinforce the grid. And this is a strategy that needs to be done in a short term. This has to be done by the government investment, and this is a political attitude that most of the governors of the states of the Northeast, they are now trying to push forward.
Do you have any discussion about using excess power for hydrogen? This is a discussion that in some countries, of course, is now getting more and more relevant.
We have some proposals that are being discussed in generating hydrogen from natural gas, because as you know, in Brazil, we have the pre-salt, a very huge oil and gas sites have been located in the ocean, and the proposal is to use this to generate hydrogen and to use this as transports and other applications.
Okay, but it's not so much a discussion yet about making that
not yet, no.
From hydropower. Okay, well, very good. Thanks a lot, Everaldo. And please have a look also at the chat window here. Maybe there are some other questions popping up for you. That was very, I think, encouraging also to hear. It's good to see that the wind sector in Brazil can more and more stand on its own. Now we go a little bit more to the south, neighbor country of Brazil. And it's my pleasure to welcome Professor José Cataldo from Uruguay. Uruguay, which some people may not think necessarily about when it comes to wind power, but it's one of the countries with the highest wind power shares. And I believe it's the country in the Americas with the highest wind power share. Now, Professor Cataldo, the floor is yours, and I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to tell us about the wind market in Uruguay.
Well, first of all, very thank you by the invitation to participate of this event. I'm very proud to participate here. Well, our country, as you say, is very small, and we are between two giants, Brazil and Argentina. But we are very proud about the evolution of the participation of renewable energy in our energy mix. From some years, we see the evolution of the consumption of energy in our country. We see a very strong increase from 2000 to 2016, with an increasement of 64% of energy and 86% in electricity. This in 2016, but if we see in the budget of energy of 2019, we see also a small increasement, but increasement at least. The participation of in this graphic, we see how the renewable energy take a protagonist play in the time. I must to remember that Uruguay doesn't have oil deposit, at least exploitable and economic useful oil deposit. Then our all the oil is imported, and all the primary source of energy in Uruguay to produce electricity from our renewables. The principal was the hydraulic. And if we see in this graphic, the electricity production by source in 2019, well, 50% of the electricity was produced by hydro, but 30% by wind and 3% by solar. Then in the past year, 33% of the electricity was produced between wind and solar. But if we see, and the installed power in this time in Uruguay is at least 5,000 megawatts. It's a small country, but almost is the same in hydraulic and wind power installed in this time, 5% of solar, and up to this year, the increasement of the installation of wind power was very high, but in this time we have some excess of energy, of electricity capacity of producing electricity in our country. Then the increasement basically is stopped in this time. We have relatively high proportion of operative restriction in this time, at least in the last year. Then the new government decided to stop or release or stop the inversion, at least in some time, particularly to produce more dynamic in the exchange of energy with Argentina and Brazil. But if we see this year, this data are of the past week, in this table we can see the electricity production this year in our country. I must to say that in this time, in this region, there is a hydraulic deficit. There is a deficit of rain in this time, not a drought, but this is a deficit of rain. And then we have a little more, very small quantity of hydropower. Then in this year, in the first 10 months of this year, the wind apport 45% of the electricity produced in Uruguay. If you assume the solar, we have more than 48% of the electricity produced in Uruguay is from the wind and solar. Also, the fossil production has some participation in this budget, with more or less 300 gigawatt hours, but this quantity is little less than the net exportation to Brazil and Argentina. Then, in the average, this production was associated or can be associated to exportation to Argentina and Brazil. Well, this reality put several challenges to our country. We are, as I say, a small country, and we have technological challenge. We must adjust technology, selection, development technology, produce knowledge, preserve the environment, logistic challenge, etc. And we need prepared professionals and technicians, and we need to create capacities and also develop technology. As I say, our country doesn't have oil deposit. Then all our energy sources are from our renewable energies. Particularly, I must to quote one of that is the biomass. Our country has the possibility to plant trees to produce energy. It is one of the important source that we can exploit in the future to accompany to wind, solar, and hydro in the future. I like to mention some activities that we are making in our country about the research. After we make the wind power assessment, following different techniques using numerical and physical modeling. In this time, we are in the incorporation of some quantity of wind energy to our net. It was necessary to have forecasting tools operative in our country, and well, the group of School of Engineers developed an operative tools, and this is used by our national dispatch of charge. Also, in this time we are studying the urban wind power is a possibility to develop the wind power in our country, the use in rural places. Around this, well, we are studying the wind power assessment, and we are developing technology. Also, the other problem, or the challenge that we put with the wind power was the analysis of operation and maintenance of wind farms and wind generators. Then we developed a methodology based on artificial neural networks to analyze or to identify anomalous operation condition, aging wind turbines, and maintenance requirement of maintenance of the wind generator. Also, in solar energy, is developing several studies around the solar power assessment to analyze the use also at with different technology using for electricity or thermal energy production. At hydraulic energy, we have one of the challenge that we have in this time, that is the accumulation of energy in our country, because we have a very big capacity to produce wind power, a very big capacity to produce electricity from solar and from biomass. But as I mentioned, we have stopped the inversion because we don't have possibility to accumulation the energy. Then this is a challenge for our country to develop a methodology to make the accumulation. Also, the production of hydrogen our oil company is developing a project that has as aim the use of hydrogen as for accumulate and to use in automobile in cars for substitute the oil. Finally, I guess I like to mention you that we have a program on postgraduate in energy engineering. We have the capacity to have the three kind of levels of formation: specialization, master in science, and PhD. And the thesis and the activities are aimed to our market to produce professionals with the capacity to treat the problem that we have in our country. Well, this was a very quick vision of our reality this time. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Muchas gracias. That was excellent to hear how far you have come with expansion of wind power. Now I see that the market has already a quite high share of wind power. What's the kind of longer term target of wind power? Is that already what you want to see in the long term, or are you still planning to install more wind turbines in the near future?
No, it's possible to install new. Sorry, in the country we have the capacity to install more wind farms. A very for our scale several times our production, several times, but it's an economic decision between the domestic use and the commercialization with Brazil and Argentina. In this time, the new government decided to stop the inversion in this kind of energy. But for have an idea, we have in wind power or in biomass the capacity to at least double to duplicate the actual power installed. A first idea.
So it sounds like very, very encouraging that I think most Latin American countries, there's no scarcity of wind and other renewable resources. That sounds excellent. But final question related to the also pandemic situation. Do you see an impact that has, like, on the power market? Are you seeing, like we see, of course, in Europe, for example, in many countries, that the power demand goes down, so the share of renewables goes up? Is that something that you can observe?
No, it's not. It was not sensible to the effect of this situation to the use of energy or the capacity. It's possible that the decision of the government related to from a economic point of view, because it's not necessary to install more wind farm because we have an excess, then the effect of the COVID-19 was not sensible to our country. Was other effect was primarily we decided not make more investment.
I see. So there is no direct impact on that.
Oh,
well,
right.
Thank you very much once again, Professor Cataldo. Great pleasure to, also be in touch like this.
So time, eh? So time. I
yeah,
don't see
indeed.
you.
yes. No, these webinars are a wonderful opportunity to meet together. And thank you again. I know that you have some other. You told us that you are.
Okay,
have other commitments later.
I like to aprovechar to make excuse me in Spanish. Un saludo para Everaldo Feitosa. See you. So, thank you.
Muchas gracias once more. And then we would now go to your other big neighbor country that you mentioned, Argentina. And it's my pleasure to welcome Professor Hector Pagani, who is the president of the Argentine Wind Energy Association. And the name is now, as we know, Argentine Wind Energy Association, Enrico Spinadel. Let us mention him as well, who passed away earlier this year, who's been one of the founders of our World Wind Energy Association, the founder of your Argentine Wind Energy Association. And we are still thinking a lot of him because he's done so much to develop wind power, not only in Argentina. But now I'm very pleased to have you with us and presenting the situation of the wind power market in Argentina. Hector Pagani, the floor is yours.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Steve Sencher, for the invitation for this webinar. Argentina has gone through several stages before reaching what we have today in renewable energy. To understand this, we must know the Argentine energy matrix. The Argentine energy matrix is made up of thermal energy, 57%, hydraulic energy, 29%, nuclear energy, 6%, renewable energy, 8%. Within the generator of renewable energy, we see how wind energy produces 7% of this type of energy. That is a very important role of wind energy in the generator of renewable energy. Until 2016, the installed wind energy capacity was very low. Only 18 wind farms with a power of 226 megawatts. This is what because all the laws up to the time were not favorable to investment. From the year 2015, with the law 27,191, begin the development of wind energy in our country, since this law took into account regarding the tax promotion mechanisms. Accelerated amortization of income to tax, to which is a date. Early refund to value add tax, VAT. Exception from the minimum presumed income tax. Tax certificate for 20% of the national component, provided that minimum of 30% is included. Exemption from tax on the distribution of dividends, 10% before the reinvestment of profits. Exemption from import duty for capital goods and equipment until 2017. No application of specific taxes, national, provincial, and municipal royalties during the promotion regime. Transfer of possible tax increase to contract price. The previous laws did not have it. That was the success of this law that until now they have been tendered. Total wind farm, 83 with 4,153 megawatts, operational power, 42 with 2,362 megawatts, of which were terminated in pandemic. With that, the first 20 days of quarantine could not work since only essential workers were allowed to work. Then, with strict protocols, they began to enable other type of job, and here they began to work in wind farm, but there were also delays due to delay in the delivery of material. Park under construction, 17 with 1,168 megawatts. Of these, 7 projects with 412 megawatts are scheduled to finish this year. Park with data, they are parks that for different reasons have not yet started. 19 with 653 megawatts, resigned 1. 10 out of service park with 29.9 megawatts. In addition, there was reduction of the cost for megawatt installation power. Before 2,100, $2 million, and with the tender, the installation cost of 1,350,000 to 1,100,000 was passed. Energy cost before $120 for megawatt hour. Now vary between $15 to $16 for megawatt. In the following image, they have the name on the park with location and capacity according to state. This finished this year, the green market. This part finished this year. Okay. I have the map with the location in wind farm power. Excuse me. Full interactive. Okay. You pick in this part and say what is the part and the capacity.
I think we can unfortunately not see that. That seems not to transmit your screen now. It's just gray.
Sí, Héctor, creo
Pardon?
que como estás compartiendo el PowerPoint, no se puede ver el mapa.
Ah, perdón.
No, si quieres ponemos el link después.
Ok. Ahora me perdí yo.
Yeah, so we will share the link after the webinar.
Okay. You see?
Yes.
Okay. What is the projection until 2030? For this, we must consider some variables. First, by 2025, we will arrive with 20% of renewable energy. In 2021, consume 132,000 gigawatt-hours per year. In 2020, we will consume 128,000 gigawatt-hours, similar to what was consumed in 2018 due to the pandemic and the economic crisis. 3. From 2022 and subsequent years, an annual increase of 3% cumulative in electric energy. We will reach 2030 with installed wind power capacity of 5,898 megawatts. What is the future and how to continue growing in wind energy? For this, we must start doing things. Expand transmission capacity in electric power transmission line. Today, many of them saturated. Resolve 19 projects with 659 megawatts not started. Continue bidding for new wind farm. In Argentina, we begin to speak of green hydrogen. We must begin to expand the renewable energy installation with greater power, especially wind energy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hector. That was also a very good presentation of what is going on in Argentina. And I understand that you have more than 1 gigawatt of wind farms under construction at this point of time. That sounds, I think, very good. So I understand you're right that you have some impact from COVID-19. There's some delay in some projects.
Pardon?
You have some delay with some
Loudly,
projects.
please. Loudly.
Sean, can you?
Yeah, sí, yo puedo en español si quiere. Sí. Si ha habido algún retraso o algún impacto por la pandemia del coronavirus en Argentina.
Yes, very. You think the first 3 months no working, and now the pandemic is very difficult for Argentine. Not all manufacturers today working. Today, in Argentina, 40% of manufacturing not working. Only working with small manufacturer. A big manufacturer not working.
Of course, we are aware that Argentina now is in a very difficult situation.
Difficult.
Coming now back to Europe as well.
Too difficult. One, the pandemic, and other, economical difficult. Argentina not have credit.
Then what would you see with green hydrogen could certainly be in the midterm an interesting option. Green hydrogen, is it you already discussing where to use it for domestic or to export green hydrogen?
Sí, ¿algún avance con el uso de hidrógeno? ¿Ha habido alguna discusión en Argentina?
The two, domestic and export. This is the idea.
Very good. Well, this is certainly a discussion we see. Many countries are now starting to look into hydrogen. We had a webinar in August about this, where we saw also some of the European, also Asian markets who are interested in, of course, in the long-term importing. Very interesting. So our best wishes to Argentina, and I think, but this is, I think, for most of us, all the best wishes, and that this situation is soon improving, which really has an impact on our lives. And I know Argentina is at the moment really in a difficult situation. Muchas gracias, also from my side. And then let's leave Argentina for a moment, but I hope you stay with us. And we go now more to the north. And it's my pleasure to welcome Sergio Ocharansky, who will speak a little bit about Chile, neighbor country of Argentina, but also about Mexico, where I understand, Sergio, you are at the moment in Mexico. And first, pleased to hear, I understand that you've just gone through this COVID-19. So we're very happy that you can join us here. Sergio.
Thank you very much, Stefan. Yes, I've also just driven the whole night and I haven't slept at all, so I hope I will make some sense. I don't have a presentation. I just want to, basically present very briefly what the situation is first in Chile and then in Mexico, as you said. Well, in Chile, there's a very interesting situation because, the government is very committed to the transition to renewable energy through there was an agreement between all the major parties, both on the left and on the right, to set up a national energy framework towards 2050, which would be independent of changes in government. This was done in the past, and it was done in a very comprehensive way. And something that was very interesting as part of that was that there was also a very strong discussion on the social dimension of energy, and especially of renewable energy. And this is not surprising because there were already many emerging conflicts since the past, with big dams in the indigenous territories, displacement, and so on and so forth. And the same things were starting to happen with wind and solar projects. So there was a very intense discussion to create a public policy for community energy, and a specific public policy for indigenous community energy in Chile. I was actually involved in those discussions. They were very difficult discussions because the private sector didn't want to hear anything about that. They were very happy to discuss about social benefits. They were very happy to discuss about consultation and agreements with communities and so on and so forth. But they didn't want a policy that promotes communities actually becoming producers of renewable energy. So because of that, the first version of the policies, which were presented to the public in 2015, were actually not ambitious enough. They basically, the private sector managed to get those policies out without touching the legislation. So it was just a matter of public policy, a matter of a statement of will. Because of that, there's a number of projects that would actually be viable, but in the current framework, because of the limitations that there are currently with the system of tenders in Chile and the other mechanisms, they haven't come to fruition yet. But now Chile is in the middle of a periodical review of this 2050 energy framework. And as part of this review, which is done again as a participatory process involving many different sectors of society, there's also a review of all the policies that have to do with community energy as well. So I'm actually quite hopeful in that sense. And Chile also, as a country with very few fossil fuel resources of its own, and understanding that it has very, very strong solar and wind resources, very strong solar in the north, very strong wind in the south, obviously has made a very strong political decision to move in that direction, which is actually moving forward and has realized the importance of involving communities, and in particular indigenous communities, in this as well. So this is the good news of it. Now, moving to Mexico, the situation in Mexico is very interesting. Many of you may have heard that since the change of government, things have changed very much in terms of Mexico's energy policy. I will now do a very quick, very, very, very fast historical kind of overview of what has been happening. Well, first of all, as a background, you have to understand that Mexico's energy policy has since the 1930s, 1940s, there's been a very strong element of nationalizing the energy resources and using the energy resources in order to benefit the nation. That happened with the oil sector for a very long time. And this is still very strongly in the minds and the spirit of Mexicans in general. But then, during that time, in addition to oil, Mexico being an oil exporting country for a very long time, the oil sector was obviously the key sector. But also there was a public state utility. For a very long time, the power sector was 100% publicly owned. And the tariffs were not set by the market, they were set politically, and they still are. There's very subsidized tariffs for, very, very subsidized tariffs for farmers, very subsidized tariffs as well for domestic users that use very little energy, which are normally the poorest sectors. And then there's higher tariffs for other users, including industrial users. So there's a political dimension in how energy prices are set, which has been inherited. This has been going on for a really long time. But then what happened starting in 1992 was that this system started to change. And the Constitution, the Constitution was later changed in 2015, but already since 1992, a number of laws were brought in that resulted in a process by which two things started happening. On one hand, the power sector started being privatized to the point to which, even before the change of the Constitution, even before, during the time when the Constitution still said that all energy sectors were state monopoly, the private sector already owned 40% of electricity production in Mexico through these new laws. Mainly at the beginning, it was fossil fuels as well. But then there was a big explosion, especially with wind energy, of very, very large projects. Particularly, the first wave of projects were very much concentrated in an indigenous region in southern Mexico, in Oaxaca. And these projects enjoyed extraordinarily high hidden subsidies because they basically didn't pay anything for wheeling the energy. The energy was being produced there in those indigenous regions, but it was being used by large industries all over the country, including in the north. And they didn't pay basically anything for the fact that the energy production was really far away from where they were consuming energy. And in addition, they enjoyed something that is basically equivalent to a kind of net metering system, which basically meant that these consortia made by private companies like Iberdrola or Acciona or Enel on the energy production side, and by large energy consumers, like cement companies and Walmart and what have you, Coca-Cola bottler, the largest Coca-Cola bottler in the world, and so on and so forth. Basically, the energy production was being, the price level was the price that these industrial users were paying before. That's what you had to compete against. You had to lower from that price. But that was a price that was politically set in order to redistribute wealth. So what you ended up having was a system of hidden subsidies that was extremely beneficial for certain corporations, both the corporations on the consuming side, as well as very large energy companies from abroad. So this went on for a very long time, while producing also a lot of social conflicts in the sites where energy was being produced. Particularly in Oaxaca, but not only, also in Yucatan and in many other regions, there's been a lot of cases of land grabs and a lot of social conflict around this. So what happened was that when recently the government changed, there was a new government that came into power, and that came into power very much with an anti-neoliberal agenda of gaining back public control, particularly in the energy sector. The problem with this new government is that it has the very old mentality of trying to get back to the old times when oil was the basis of the national economy and certain the welfare of certain sections of society. So it's completely focused on hydrocarbons, which is absolutely terrible. But this also responds to the fact that especially those first wind energy projects that were made, as well as some of the other projects that were done later on the basis of tenders, were actually, on one hand, ripping off indigenous communities and other local communities and creating very negative social impacts. And at the same time, enjoying very high hidden subsidies, basically a lot of privileges, and in a very corrupt way, because many government officials got very high positions in these companies, including a former president is now part of the board of Iberdrola. So basically, the behavior of the sector, and particularly of very large companies, made it very easy to attack the renewable energy sector. Made it very easy to identify renewable energy with, first, the privatization of the power sector, and second, corruption and hidden public subsidies for private gain, as well, of course, as the violation of territorial and collective rights of indigenous communities. So now the situation is a disaster. On the basis of the COVID crisis, the government has, well, even before the COVID crisis, this started, but especially since the COVID crisis, the government has taken this as an opportunity to issue a number of regulations and public policies that go completely against renewable energy. They are using as an excuse the fact that energy consumption went down because of COVID. Because of that, obviously, the share of renewable energies went up. And on the basis of that, using that as an excuse, they've come up with a number of different measures, which are suspended by courts. There's been a lot of litigation around this, and courts have actually suspended many of these measures. But still, the political message has been sent, and there's now a lot of uncertainty in the sector, and a lot of companies that are deciding not to invest in Mexico anymore at all in the energy sector, not only in renewables. For example, Iberdrola, which is the largest private company in the power sector in Mexico, recently announced that it would stop all investments in Mexico, including some investments in, thermal company, thermal power stations burning gas. It's not primarily even about renewable energy. But yeah, it's a situation of a lot of uncertainty. Certainly, the government policy is disastrous. What they are going for now is refineries, increasing oil production, which they are not going to succeed because it's not so easy. And also, which is even more worrying, expanding gas pipelines in order to make the entire country dependent on American fracking gas. I mean, the entire North is already depending on imported gas from fracking from the US, but now they are planning to expand a number of new gas pipelines to also make the south of the country dependent on American gas. And that's the main thrust of Mexican public policy right now, as far as electricity is concerned, which is obviously a complete disaster. The problem is that the kind of response that this disastrous policy is receiving from the side of some NGOs in Mexico, as well as from the side of international institutions like ARENA and so on and so forth, is basically to tell the Mexican government, continue doing what previous governments were doing. Continue privatizing the power sector, continue granting very good contracts, long-term contracts to private companies, as if this was the only way to conduct the transition to renewable energy. And this is not going to happen, at least with this government. And I personally think it will not happen with future governments either. I think what this whole situation is proving is the need for Mexico to define its own path towards the transition to renewable energy, one that is different from the standard recipe, which involves speeding up the privatization of power sectors in countries where there is still a very strong public power sector that is structured around social objectives, as is the case in Mexico. So I think it's a very interesting situation, actually. I think it's a pity that the kind of analysis that is made of it remains only at the very superficial level of saying, oh, the Mexican government is terrible because it's promoting fossil fuels, which is true. I couldn't agree more to this statement. But it fails to see all the deep mistakes, the terrible mistakes that have been made by the renewable energy sector in Mexico. And I know that it's not only in Mexico, in many other places as well. A lot of what is happening now in Mexico, the sector has brought it upon itself. And nobody, other than a few NGOs that are financed by large American foundations and the private companies themselves, has raised a single finger to defend the energy transition in Mexico because of the disastrous way in which it was done in the past. So now, just to close, what I hope, now there's something that just came out, which is a reason for hope, is that another part of the government, the Council for Science and Technology, has just issued a call for proposals, which has as its main objective to develop new pathways for the transition in Mexico. So in addition to the very terrible parts of the Mexican government that are obsessed about fossil fuels and just want to see fossil fuels. There are other parts of the Mexican government that are trying to find this path towards a different model of transition. And I think that that's where the hope is. But it's not going to be easy, and it's not going to be fast. And that is bad news, because we urgently need a transition. But yeah, I hope that this process will be possible to speed it up, and that we will be seeing, amongst other things, a lot of community projects that are actually also publicly owned, because indigenous communities and other rural communities in Mexico are actually part of the state, but are organized in a different way. So yeah, that would be it from my side. I'm more than happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sergio. And that was indeed a very comprehensive presentation of what's going on in Chile. And I'm sure that Chile is now also, there must be also an impact from the decision just taken that there will be a new constitution. And also Mexico. And as usual, you have a very critical eye on the developments. And I think it is indeed very important, your focus on community energy, making sure that the people are those who benefit. And we have also other events. We had previous webinar with a focus on community energy. How is at the moment the concrete prospect of having community wind farms? Is there a delay, or is there any prospects of having that? Sergio, we spent together quite some time when I was in Mexico for the MEXIREC conference. And we had some discussions also at that time. Could you just briefly mention, are there any prospects?
Well, the main problem is that there's a lot of people in the Mexican government that are interested in that happening, but the Secretary of Energy isn't. The problem is that basically the Union of Oil Workers has taken over the Secretary of Energy. The secretary, the person, the woman who is Secretary of Energy now in Mexico, she's an oil engineer, and she basically represents the workers of the oil union, which is a very strong and powerful union. And she has absolutely no interest in any form of renewable energy. There are some people in the Secretary of Energy that do have interest, but not her. So, and she's a very centralizing and very, complicated person. But I think that with what is happening now with the Council of Science and Technology, that this could be a pathway towards many more projects. I don't know how fast it's going to be to have large-scale community wind farms like the one that we've been working with the community for a very long time in Oaxaca. That would be 102 megawatts. That might take longer, but we're already working in smaller projects. We're, for example, now working on a project of 7 megawatts in Yucatan with the Mayan community. And these kind of projects, I think, will probably go faster. So yeah, I do think there's reason for hope, but it's not all wonderful. I mean, the main problem is actually the Secretary of Energy herself, I'm afraid. And
actually, it sounds familiar to the situation we had in Germany for many years, where the coal mine trade union was very strong and kind of directly had contact to the Minister of Energy at that time. Yeah, so I can understand that is a challenging situation. Let me mention at this point of time, when speaking about community energy, that we've just announced our World Community Power Conference, which will also be held as an online event on 19th of November, which is 3 weeks from now. And the main focus will be on women in community energy. And of course, special invitation to everyone, in particular also now to Sergio, that we'd be happy to hear about the role of women in such projects. Of course, we're now mainly looking for female speakers, when usually we have a male bias, which I think is still fine, because many men are still the pioneers in this sector. But of course, it's very important to kind of increase the scope and social mobilization. So thanks a lot, Sergio. Also for you, please have a look in case there are any questions coming up. And with that, I would then go to our next speaker, which, according to our program, is Professor Conrado Moreno from Cuba. But for some reasons, he's not able to join us, for technical reasons, actually. And he prepared a PowerPoint presentation, which will now be presented by Jean-Daniel Pitelou, who is my colleague here at our head office in Bonn. But I think that also makes some sense because, Jean, as you come from Venezuela, which is somehow not so far from the region we're going to talk about. So Conrado presented us an overview of the wind power developments in Cuba, but also in the Caribbean, and also some statistics about Central American countries. And Sean, I'm very pleased that you can present this now to us.
Thank you, Stefan. And thank you, everybody. And first, I would like to send my regards to our colleagues from Cuba, Conrado, Alejandro. And thank you also for sharing this slide so we can share this with all the people in the webinar. So yeah, first I will start with Cuba. In Cuba, there's this zero use of fossil fuels. Let's say they want to do that. But first they need to have some actions before they achieve that, of course. And the first thing they want to do is to decrease or the demand of electricity in the country, or to, let's say, to have more efficient use of energy. And the other one is increase, of course, the use of renewable energy, especially wind and solar and biomass. So there are some, let's say, steps they have to fulfill for reaching this goal. One is, of course, establishing a strategy for 100% renewable energy use in the country. Second one is to kind of reduce the use of oil in the country. In the recent years, they had a lot of oil coming out from Venezuela, very cheap oil. So there was a lot of, let's say, improvement in terms of energy and also economy in the country. But of course, Venezuela is also in a crisis since some years. So they're receiving less oil. So of course, they're trying to find any other sources now. So they're kind of getting back into the track again of renewables. So also, of course, to develop some technologies and capacity building in the country. So in terms of what is the energy sources in Cuba by the current situation, they have biomass, especially from sugarcane, huge capacity. They also have some hydropower, also some solar energy and wind power, but not as much as you can see here. Only 4 wind farms are there. And you can also see here at the end some of the, let's say, on the consumption side, where the main use for which are, let's say, kind of autonomous in terms of energy in Cuba. So these are some of the actually solar power plants they have installed in the recent years. Here you can see some 2.5 megawatt wind solar farms in some areas of the country. Some of them are, because you can see here on the rooftop of some small companies. Others are like independent or isolated solar farms. So what are the prospects? Since 2014, they kind of approved a new policy where they wanted to increase by 6 times the current renewable energy installations in Cuba. So the goal is to install 2 gigawatts of new electric power, mainly by solar and wind and biomass. So you can see here in this list how many wind farms they're planning to install on solar wind farms. But also they want to use other kind of renewable energies, especially on urban solid waste and solar thermal energy. So the electricity mix should look like this in 2030. You can see here an increase of biomass, also some 6% of wind, 3% of solar, but still they are quite dependent on oil. And And this is important because they don't have any, or they have very little oil resources, so they have to import most of this oil, and especially mainly now from Venezuela, which at the same time is currently under a kind of oil crisis. They don't have gasoline in the country, so they're not so willing to now ship oil outside the country. So what is happening in the development, or what will be the development? They want to produce generate 7,000 gigawatts per year from renewable energies in 2030. They will have, of course, have some high costs, about 3,700 million US dollars, and they will have a significant reduction on CO2 emissions. And they, of course, they want to fulfill this this policy also to contribute on the mitigation of climate change. So this is a nice picture of one of the wind farms in Cuba that have been installed before 2010. You can see here the 4 operative wind farms in Cuba, where they are located and which years. So you can see here after 2010, there was no new wind farm installations in Cuba. As I mentioned, it was one thing that influenced that was the support from Venezuela in terms of oil. So they didn't have to go to renewables because they were getting cheap oil. So yeah, so you can see here, well, in this list, only 3 wind farms were commissioned from 2006 to 2010. 2 of the wind farm constructions were basically stopped at some point, and the main reason why this haven't, let's say, developed as it was planned from 2010 is, of course, the economic crisis, the lack of financing resources, as well as in Argentina, and of course now the coronavirus pandemic, the COVID-19. So you can see here which are the plans from now to 2030. You can see here where the 13 wind farms they're planning to install are located and the sizes. Now we jump to the Caribbean countries. Most of the Caribbean countries you see in this map, they have some wind installations already. I must say, in many of these countries, usually projects takes more time to develop and to install. So let's say the cycle of new projects is bigger than in other mature markets. So every 2-3 years, we hear something about new development in these countries. No? It takes even 4 or 5 years to have new installations. So the main challenge for all these countries, of course, they depend on oil, and very expensive oil, usually coming from US. So of course they would like to have any other kind of source of energy, and of course renewable, they have very good renewable energies, let's say, resources, especially wind. So they have been since many years trying to let's say develop an industry of wind, especially. And you see here in this list what is the situation now. All these countries with wind power. You can see here the Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico are the biggest markets in the Caribbean, followed by Jamaica. So you can see here also, and this is my opinion, many of these countries have a similar, let's say, or even less population and area than Uruguay. So they should follow the example of Uruguay in how they, from starting with small increases of wind power, then suddenly they could reach a bigger installation. So I think it's time for many of these countries that they take as an example, and they finalize or they concrete this increasement in the wind power generation. So in other Central American countries, you can see here, Panama, and we have very good installations in the recent year, and Costa Rica also. So the same as in the Caribbean countries, every 2, 3, 4 years we hear some new wind farms that have come into the country. Yeah, and as well as I mentioned with the case of Uruguay, it should be an example for many of these countries on how they can increase, or how they can mature, let's say, more the wind industry in the countries. I have to say that all these countries, of course, have been affected on the coronavirus, especially on the economic side. Basically, just the decisions or the priorities have been shifted maybe to other areas, more critical at the moment. But there is a lot of resources, and the wind and solar resources. So, and many of them have this in their agendas. And I hope in the near future there will be new developments on all these countries, especially because they have the resources and they need to get away a little bit from oil that is costing them a lot of resources. So that, I think that was all. Yes, and thank you again to Conrado and Alejandro for sending the slides. Thank you.
Yes, and indeed, thanks also from my side to Conrado and Alejandro, and I hope that they can later then watch their presentation on YouTube. Thanks a lot, Sean, also for presenting this. It's from a very knowledgeable perspective. So that was also very good, and I think it is very encouraging to see the progress of wind power in the whole region, and to see the resources that you have in all the Latin American countries. You also mentioned the impact of COVID-19, which is actually quite similar to most of the other countries where we heard from, that there will be a delay in this year. There is an impact in most countries this year, but the mid to long-term prospects are actually bright for wind power. Yeah, thanks a lot. With this, we will move to the north, to the United States and Canada. And here again, my pleasure to welcome Michael Barnard, who is an expert for these two markets. And we now are curious to hear about how wind power develops in the United States and Canada. In particular the US, with a very kind of dynamic political situation at this point of time, and Canada. Michael, a great welcome to you, and look forward now to hearing from you.
Thank you, Stefan, and thank you to the rest of the speakers for bringing us up to date on the rest of the Americas. Michael Bernard, Chief Strategist with TFIE Strategy, Inc., former Senior Fellow of Wind with American think tank on on renewable energy, and currently based in Canada, thankfully. Let's start with the United States. You may have heard there's an election coming up very shortly. Possibly you've heard that. And that's a big news election for the wind industry and for renewables and for the climate. The current administration has got strong anti-wind rhetoric and anti-climate change rhetoric, but 70% of U.S. congressional districts have strong wind industry components. So the statements from the federal level are not aligned with actual Republican states, and certainly not with Democratic-leaning states in the United States. And so what we'll see out of this election is likely a sea change in terms of support. It has been problematic this year and over the past few years. The coronavirus obviously is very concerning in the United States. 232,000 dead as of yesterday, and a projected 400,000 by January 1st, which is to say equivalent to the war deaths in World War II for the United States for the entirety of World War II. The current projection is over 600,000 dead by the time the coronavirus runs its course as the most probable. And so this is a very serious concern for the entire nation. The variance in coronavirus response is significant across partisan divides there as well. In the wind industry specifically, while 14.3 gigawatts were projected for the year, at mid-year, only 4.3 gigawatts of new capacity had been added. It's unlikely they're going to achieve the 14.3 gigawatts. Force majeure clauses have been invoked, and major turbine manufacturing sites have laid off hundreds of staff. Quite a bit of the effort is significantly reduced. Governmental response so far from the Republican president and Senate control is fossil fuel industry support and nothing for wind energy. No extension of the industrial tax credit for wind energy in the the production tax credit for wind energy in the United States. There is good news potential out of this, however. One of the things I've did this year is a Clean Technica asked me to do a presidential climate policy report card across Obama, Biden, Trump, Pence, and the potential Biden-Harris incumbents. So while wind energy has not been a focus at the federal level, as you can see, we'll probably see in the electrical generation row an improvement. Obama and Biden's strategy was an all of the above energy strategy, which included a lot of natural gas. Trump and Pence's strategy has been strongly focused on coal and fossil fuels. So obviously, not aligned with climate goals and policies. Biden and Harris's pledges in their plan related to electrical generation are much more positive than the Obama-Biden activities. At one point, the Biden plan included a high voltage direct current trunk down through Central America to Latin America to provide a transmission corridor for renewable energy linking the Americas, in part a response to China's Belt and Road. That's fallen out of their current plan, but internal to the United States, the current plan has a national high voltage direct current grid to enable renewable energy of all types to move across the country. The selection of Kamala Harris as his running mate is also very significant. In my assessment of the various leading candidates' climate change plans for Clean Technica, Kamala Harris had the strongest one, and she is in a position to do something about it. There are significant challenges that will come out of the likely transition. At present, Biden and Harris are strongly projected to be the most likely winners. It's likely that the House of Congress will remain in Democratic hands, and in fact, Democratic control will increase. And there's a strong probability that Senate will also switch to Democratic. For the wind industry, those are all positive alignment opportunities. However, you may remember that in 2016, there were similar polling assertions about Trump versus Clinton, and Trump managed to pull out a win in that country. So right now, the voter turnout and the polling and advanced polling strongly supports a Democratic blue wave, which would be strongly advantageous for wind and also for climate change in general. The Biden-Harris campaign has pledged to re-enter the Paris Accord and also the Kigali Amendment, which is less pertinent directly to wind energy, but still important. Canada is different. We are managing coronavirus much more effectively than the United States has. It is being treated very seriously here. We were one of the global hotspots for SARS in 2003, and that has led us to have stronger institutional memories than the United States has maintained for pandemics. Our expected 400 megawatts of new wind energy for this year has not materialized, unsurprisingly. Force majeure and frustration lawsuits are in existence. The governmental response for COVID-19 was $16 billion for the fossil fuel industry so far. And so that is a strong focus of the federal government and provincial governments to bail out the oil and gas industry, especially. and that's unfortunate. The electricity demand declined in all the provinces, but Ontario saw net export expanses and mostly out of their nuclear generation capacity. We've now seen that the Saskatchewan now is starting to see a pipeline for new wind energy. Alberta's wind energy pipeline is reasonably strong, with several hundred megawatts in construction or in plan. The rest of the country is very light for wind energy. The Ford administration in Ontario is the one that tore up 758 renewable energy contracts with small and medium-sized providers, and shuttered construction of 2 separate wind farms of reasonable sizes, grid utility scale wind farms, for ideological and political reasons. We see no improvement there. Quebec had completed its very significant build out of 4 gigawatts of wind capacity and is not projecting substantial increases there. British Columbia, of course, is hydroelectric bound, is building a major dam in the northeast, but is not building new wind energy at this point. 3 points of positive assertion out of this, though. First of all, the Canadian Renewable Energy Association has merged the wind and solar lobbying groups under CanWea's Robert Horning, who many of you probably know. And so the scale of advocacy for renewables and the coordination of advocacy for renewables has improved in Canada as of this year. Second, the National Resources Canada has released a new geomap of all wind farm locations and wind turbines in Canada. As you can see, we have some very far north. That was done in, people that I've worked with, and many of you probably know, Tim Weiss and Tom Levy, contributed to the development of this initiative. So that's a very positive thing for Canada to be able to see exactly where the wind turbines are, capacities and the like. The final piece about the federal government, while their actions this year have been focused on the fossil fuel industry, which dominates in Alberta and Saskatchewan, the speech from the throne on September 23rd advocated a green recovery, committed to exceeding our Paris Accord targets for 2030, and committed to legislation which would bring Canada to carbon neutrality by 2050. That obviously is a very substantial transformation from today. The United States and Canada share an unfortunate distinction of having among the highest per capita CO2 emissions globally. And that's going to take a lot to change. That's the formal presentation. Any questions?
Yeah, thank you so much. I think that was a wonderful overview. Also, thanks a lot for your comments about the US election situation. That's very helpful, of course, to understand the situation. I've got one question related to that slide where you presented the stance of the different candidates or the president, vice president teams. US military, you were presenting Obama with an A, and I think it was Trump with F, and then a D for Biden. What is that referring to? Military using renewable energy?
No, under the Obama administration, he drew down foreign troops from 150,000 in active conflict zones around the world to 15,000. He's radically altered the strategic stance of the US military from boots on the ground and ships in the sea to cyber terrorism and to drone warfare. What this did is it created an almost 20% decrease in US military fossil fuel use. And as the US military is the largest single organization in the world for energy consumption and averages 80% of all federal energy consumption for the United States. That is actually a very significant transformation of emissions. He also entered the Paris Accord, of course, and agreed under the Paris Accord and committed the United States at that point to reporting military emissions for the first time. You'll remember that that was excluded from the Kyoto Protocol, partly because the United States could not support that at the time. What this would have led to and has led to in other countries is military reporting of emissions. Under the Trump administration, the focus on declines in US military emissions went away at the federal level. The US military continued to make efforts in that regard. The reason that Biden and Harris are currently a D on that is simply because they are silent on it.
Okay.
That is understandable in a campaign year. The American military is currently as big as the next 7 militaries in the world. It's a very large voting bloc of currently acting service people and veterans. And right now, Trump and Biden have lost the US military for the first time for Republicans in decades. Typically, the active US military personnel vote Republican by a 2/3 majority. But right now they're polling at 38% support for Trump and Biden. So the Biden and Harris campaign are silent on this. I expect that once they start acting in their roles as president and vice president, and the Democratic Party has control, that their actual policies will be much more positive than their campaign pledges.
I was also, thank you very much. I think this is very interesting. I was also thinking of and wondering, because I remember from reports also some numbers that the US military was actually, or used to be, one of the biggest investors in renewable energy, which is not so, of course, well known. Have you any insights whether that's changed?
They were an investor in research for certain classes of renewable energy. DARPA-E was a federal and fairly strongly militarily aligned effort. They have bought some renewable energy. It's not been their primary focus. The US military's stance is that global warming is a strategic threat to the US military for 2 reasons. One is the obvious increase in global conflicts, especially in zones which are problematic with fragile nation states today. But secondarily, because the US military maintains bases at sea level globally, and all of those bases are at risk of sea level rise. They've had military air bases at sea level, which have flooded in recent hurricane events, which is something that's unprecedented. So the ability of the US military to project force around the world is threatened by global sea level rise and extreme weather events. And they're very clear on that. They are not aligned with President Trump and his administration in terms of the reality and severity of climate change. They have continued their efforts related to decarbonization, but without strong federal strategic alignment, it's more difficult for them. And so they have, it's been a reduction in that. One of the key programs that they had globally has been canceled. It was a military base housing efficiency program. And unfortunately, that's gone by the wayside, at least temporarily.
Oh, thank you. I think that explains sufficiently indeed why you are the A, F, and D then. Okay, thanks so much, Mike. That was indeed very good. Of course, from Canada, not so good news, but I see that there is a question, or Everaldo would like to ask you a question. Everaldo, please, you can unmute yourself and maybe also switch on your camera if you like and ask directly.
Yes. Hello. Can you hear me? Yeah?
Yes, I can, Everaldo.
Yes. Okay. Congratulations, Michael, for your nice presentation. My question is related to the proposal that you have made, that you have mentioned from binding related to the high DC voltage transmission line between US and South America. Can you explain a little bit what kind of proposal is this?
Yeah, in Biden's original climate change plan, when he was a candidate for the presidential nominee, his proposal was to work with Central America and run a high voltage direct current line down through the Central America down to into South America. The intent there was to provide a strong industrial linkage for clean energy transmission from Canada down into South America. The intent there would be to counter some of the Chinese Belt and Road initiatives where China is investing in infrastructure and industrial and economic projects around the world. It would have been a soft power America's counter to that, which would have been strongly beneficial. It would have allowed northern Brazilian wind energy to flow up to Mexico and to the southern United States. In concept, it's a very limited version of the Chinese proposal for a global polar HVDC intercontinental grid, which they've projected as being a cost of, I think, $2 trillion, which isn't that much, really. And so it would have been a lot, much less expensive than that. It would have been very beneficial. Certainly, high voltage direct current is the future of energy distribution globally. The recent announcement of the major solar farm in Australia, which is to transmit electricity through 2 underwater HVDC cables to Singapore, is the state of the future. Sorry, Stefan, it's not green hydrogen and shipping green hydrogen. It's HVDC and electrons. Green hydrogen is, in my opinion, a bit of a red herring. Does that answer your question, Everaldo?
Yes, yeah, thank you, Martin. Thank you very much.
Yeah, that is certainly, I think we should maybe have a separate webinar on the future of the energy supply. We had already one, as I mentioned, on hydrogen, but also the role of decentralized versus centralized solutions, and where does it make sense to have HVDC power lines, as you said, and where does it make sense to focus more on? And it's very interesting that obviously the world develops into a kind of hybrid system. When you look at, for example, Australia, that the domestic battery systems are now becoming part of the national supply system. It's not only used for their houses, individual houses, but for the whole national system. Yeah, I would not like to take others or prevent others from asking any questions. Do we have other comments or questions? Also to our other speakers. So if we do not have any other comments and questions, then also a great thank you from my side to all our speakers who kept their time. I think this is the first time that all the speakers indeed stayed within the requested time frame. Congratulations for this as well. And I think this was an excellent webinar of getting an idea of what is the situation of wind power, beyond wind power, renewable energy in the Americas. Great thank you to all of you, to the speakers, also to those in the audience. As in the past, we will make all these presentations available. The live stream is still ongoing on YouTube, so you can check that right away. And the complete kind of webinar will be available right away, but we will also make all the individual presentations available so that people who want to see only Uruguay, they don't need to listen to or just search for that. Again, from my side, great thank you. We now conclude this webinar, this meeting, and again, announcing that our next webinar that's been scheduled is the 3rd World Community Power Conference, which will take place on the 19th of November, which will be a major event in the morning and in the afternoon, so that we can enable people from Australia, Asia, up to the Western Hemisphere, where you are, Michael, west of North America, to join maybe not at the same time, but be part of the same conference and meeting and discuss the status of community energy around the world with a special focus of the role of women. So the focus will be more on the socioeconomic, social aspects of that. With this, thank you. Have a nice day. Have a nice evening, and look forward to see you all soon again. And I think it's time again to say, stay safe, stay healthy. Goodbye.